welcome everyone. So this session is hosted by PyLadies Amsterdam, and we're a group that who basically loves coding, especially in Python, and we want to spread that joy, spread the technical skills. So we do a lot of workshops, events that are more practical and give you the skills you need to find your way and make yourself a better coder, better Pythonista. And this is one of the series of workshops where personally I've had really bad experiences with technical presentations as a speaker and as a part of the audience. So hopefully this will help me get better. So Sharon, the floor is all yours.
Okay, so 2 years ago, I went also to a tech conference like Bhumika was telling about in the US, and I had a big revelation about what it means to have a good presentation or to see a good presentation. So I used to always think that a good presentation was about having a really cool project or really cool content to present, or about how smart you are and just about how much knowledge you could broadcast to the audience. And that by the audience just being there, listening, they would get smarter by just hearing this information. So I was at this conference 2 years ago, and I was super excited. I was about to see the smartest people in the field presenting the state-of-the-art technology. So really the coolest stuff. And I was certain I would come home 10 times smarter than I was. But after a few hours, I was sitting in this room and I just couldn't keep my attention to the screen or to the speaker. I saw these slides full of text, numbers, formulas, and I just couldn't keep track anymore. It took me so much effort to focus, and I noticed I kept zoning out and looking at my phone. I looked through the room and I saw basically everyone doing the same thing. Everyone was looking at their phone, being distracted, not listening to the speaker, even though the speaker had a really, really cool project to tell. And at the end of the day, I and many others didn't go home 10 times smarter, but I actually felt a little bit dumber because I forgot most of the information already. And then I realized a good presentation is not about the cool project or showing how much or how cool things you did, what kind of cool things you did. Because at this conference, those were the smartest people with the smartest presentations. But in the end, it's really about what the audience can take home, that they can feel a little bit smarter by attending and think, whoa, that was interesting. I want to know more about that. So over the years, I gathered a lot of tips and tricks to improve my own presentations, making them better, making sure that the audience went home feeling a little bit smarter than they were before. And these are tips and tricks that I wish I knew before I started my presentation journey. And I'm super, super excited to share them with you today. So today we're going to talk about an introduction to delivering technical presentations with confidence. And in this presentation, we're going to cover 3 concepts: how to structure your story, how to create your slide deck, and how to present it with confidence. Now, since a year, how we give presentations has changed. More and more has been online, making it different to present. So during this presentation, I also want to give you some little tips and tweaks or tips and tricks to tweak your online presentation. So at the end of each of these 3 parts, you will see this slide or this icon showing that this is a tip to improve your presentations for an online audience. And even though this is online and you might be far away from me, I still also want to engage with you. So what we're going to do is we're going to use an app, or it's a browser, Slido, to make sure that I can also ask you some questions that you need to answer. So go to slido.com, and there you can sign in into the channel U171. You can also use this QR code or the link that is below. So go to slido.com U171. You can go into a browser, you can go look at it at your phone. And then I will be able to ask you some questions as well. So we have an interactive session. So if you're already in this channel, look at slido.com, you will see the question, describe your last meeting or presentation in one word. So fill in the text box, the word that describes your last presentation or your last meeting, could be from today, where someone presented something to you. Did you feel excited? Did you feel information overload? Did you feel tired? Did you feel inspired? Were you motivated? So try to describe your last meeting or last presentation. So I already see slowly some words coming in. We see fast, draining, exciting, boring, awful, information overload, slow. So overall, I'm happy that I see some exciting words here as well. But overall, we see that quite a lot of people had a boring or awful or dense or draining meeting. This is such a shame because especially now we are in a lot of online meetings as well. So let's go to the next question. There is no wrong or right answer here, but I want you to be honest. So we're going to go to the next slide and you will see something else popping up in Slido. Now the question to you, in the last presentation you attended, did you look at your phone or screen? So did you look at your phone or screen? It doesn't have to be very long, but did you look at it? So answer yes, several times. Yes, but only once, I swear. You're not sure, or no, definitely not. So we slowly see some answers coming in. We already have 16 answers. And overall, people looked at their phones multiple times during these presentations. And I have to admit that I also did that today. And it turns out that actually 4 out of 5 business professionals actually admitted to shifting their focus away from the speaker during a presentation. So 4 out of 5 people will look at their screen. And when they look at their screen, they don't listen to the speaker. There's a moment that this person is distracted. So 4 out of 5 people, this is a very common problem. So you already noticed you're not alone. Everyone looks at their phone once in a while, but we actually want to really reduce this to have all the audience, the attention of your audience. So this brings me actually to a quote that I think really correctly describes what it's like to give a good presentation. So the success of your presentation will be judged not by the knowledge you sent, but by what the listener receives. So the success of your presentation will be judged not by what the knowledge you sent, but by what the listener receives. So for a successful presentation, we need to make sure that the audience, the listener, can absorb all the information and receive all the information you're sending out. So this will also be the golden thread throughout this talk. How can we form our presentation in such a way that the listener can receive as much as possible to get your presentation to a success? Now we start with structuring our story. The steps we will describe here today can also be found in a form in the PyLadies repository. So we made a step-by-step plan that I'm going to walk you through now, but you can also find it later in the repository whenever you are creating your own presentation. I really urge you to do this part on, offline, or at least on pen and paper, without touching any of the slides. So we're going to go into structuring your story to making sure that your audience receives everything that you are broadcasting. Now, the first part, or maybe the most important question, is who is the listener? So who is your audience? What is their background? What do they already know about the topic? And what would they be interested in? Imagine that you have to create a presentation for PyLadies about a Python topic. Let's say we create a presentation about Python applications. If your audience is just new to Python and is more in their beginner phase, you might walk through the code slowly, give simple examples, and give a detailed explanation of why things work the way they work. But if you would have an audience that is more advanced, let's say you have Python coders that are already coding for 10 years, already created Python applications by themselves, you might zoom in on some cool tips and tricks or show more advanced stuff. So who your audience is really influences what your presentation is going to be about, or at least what is going to be in the presentation and how much or how little you're going to explain. And I think that actually every presentation should get tweaked for the audience that you have, even if it's just a little bit. Make sure that it's important for the audience. And sometimes you don't really know who the listener is, but you can always ask the host. So the host should know, or most of the time knows, who the audience is, who has registered, what they're interested in. And they would always be happy to help you, because if they can help you give a better view of who the listener is, they can help you create a better presentation. So we first need to know who the audience is. This is the first thing you write down when you start your presentation. Now, when you know who the listener is, the next important part is, why should the listener care? So why should your audience even care about this topic? And I always really like to remember it with this abbreviation, WIFI, which means what's in it for you. So with you, we mean the audience. So what is in it for the audience? Why should the audience care? Why is this important to them? How can this help their lives be better? How can this change the way they think? So write down why your presentation can be important for your audience. And then make it clear at the beginning of your presentation. Don't save it until the end. They need to know in the beginning already why it's relevant for them, and then it's easier to stay focused. So what's in it for you? Now we know who the audience is, why they should care. Now, next step is we create one main takeaway. So what if you would only have 60 seconds on stage? What would you tell your audience about this topic? What if they could only remember one thing? What is the thing you really want them to remember? Write this down. And this one main takeaway, you can use as a guide to create your whole presentation. Everything that will be in your story will contribute to this one main takeaway. And you can also use it at the end of the presentation. And you will notice during this presentation that I will do that as well. So now we know our audience, we know why they should care, and we have the one most important thing that they should take away from this presentation. Now, next up, we need to flow. We need to write everything down, what you could talk about in this presentation. So write down everything you can think of that can be included. Add examples, stories, visuals, just write everything down and nothing is too crazy. Be very detailed. So these are all your options to put into this presentation. Now you create this long list and you can already maybe realize that this might be too much to put in all in one presentation. So what we're going to do first is we're going to group everything in categories to combine them a bit more. So actually for people, it's actually easier to remember things in groups. If you think about how you maybe remember a phone number, depends a bit per person, but some people remember them in groups of 2, some people remember them in groups of 3. So this also holds for a presentation. Try to bundle all the things that belong together in one category or one group. So now we have this list with categories, groups. Next up, we need to choose which categories we take. So we're going to choose 3. It actually turns out that the working memory of people, especially when you try to remember new information, is not as good as we hope it to be or think it to be. It turns out that people can actually only remember 3 to 7 things new at the same time. So for this reason, I really recommend you to choose 3 of these concepts or 3 of these categories to present. Everything that falls out, that doesn't belong to these 3 concepts, you skip. Because the more information you're going to add to the presentation, the less they will actually remember. So if you add all your information, chances are they will actually remember almost nothing. So choose 3 concepts that you want to add to this presentation. It depends a bit on how big your presentation is or how long your presentation is, how big you can make these concepts, but try to structure them in 3. Another reason why I recommend 3 is that people like to remember things in 3s. It's also called the rule of 3. You will see this sometimes happening in other presentations or how people sum it up. So 3 is a really nice number to create your concepts here. Now we know how many things people can keep in their memory, but it's also important how long they can keep their attention on these things. So we're going to go back to Slido, and this is a question for you. On average, how long do you think your audience can keep their attention? So on average, how long can an audience keep their attention? Is this 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, or 1 hour? So it's definitely not 2 hours. So is it 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, or 1 hour? So we already have some answers coming in. I see 16 responses. So 44% actually had the right answer. It turns out that the average attention of your audience is only 10 minutes. So you might think, but we give regular presentations of more than hours. Today is even a presentation that is longer than 10 minutes. How can we do this? So even though the average attention span is 10 minutes, and it's quite difficult to keep that attention, it's actually quite easy to regain the attention of your audience. So what you want to do is you actually want to re-engage your audience every 10 minutes. So to make sure that they don't drift away, sleep, and look through their phone. So try to create your story in such a way that around every 10 minutes, and it can be more often, but at least around every 10 minutes, you engage with your audience. And this can be a mini break, especially if you're doing a presentation for more than an hour. I would definitely recommend a break. You can do something interactive. You can change to a different topic, but you can also do some smaller things. So you could, for example, tell a story. You can ask the audience a question. Ask them to imagine something. And by doing this, they have to actively engage a little bit more. So you can ask, for example, via Slido some questions to your audience. Something that also often helps, especially if you're in a meeting or a presentation with a lot of people with their webcams on, you can ask them to vote just by moving their hands. And then there's some activity going on. So make sure you re-engage your audience around every 10 minutes, just to make sure that they are pulled back into your story. Now let's go into the online tips. It turns out that this attention span from 10 minutes is actually shorter when you're doing it online. So maybe you already realized this a bit, but because the speaker cannot really see you or see what you're doing, it is actually much easier to grab your phone, to just listen and do something else. Maybe multitask, finishing the last things from your work. And I have to admit, this is something I also do quite regularly during presentations, but you want to avoid this multitasking. So what I would advise for your online audience is to re-engage them a little bit more with questions. So ask them a question. They can add the answers in the chat. You can use tools for this. You can use your hands for this, but try to re-engage a little bit more with them. The rest of the story structure is quite similar, but this part you should do a little bit more. So this is my tip for you if you do this for an online audience. So let's recap really quickly. We now know that we need to know who the listener is, why they should care. We need one main takeaway, one thing that they definitely should remember from your presentation. Then we create 3 concepts in your presentation. You can even create takeaways for these 3 parts as well. And then you want to re-engage with your audience around every 10 minutes, maybe even more. And do this with different things. So a story, a question, maybe a little break. And then you have the foundations to create a story for your audience. Now, next up is creating slides. And even though a really good story is really important, I think creating good slides is maybe equally as important, especially because bad slides can really distract your audience. Now, how can we start with creating these slides? So the first question that comes to mind is, how many should we create? Should we do 4? Maybe 9? There are actually a lot of recommendations that you should do 10 if you look online. Maybe we should do 16, maybe more, maybe even more. And I would say it really doesn't matter. So my recommendation is that the number of slides doesn't matter. I've seen the best presentations with over 50 slides, and I've seen really bad presentations with only 5 slides. So the number of slides doesn't really matter. What really matters is what's on the slides. So that was quite an intense slide. I hope you could read a bit. Maybe you felt a little overwhelmed or a little bit overloaded, but this is actually how a lot of people create these slides. They put all the information they have on this slide. So now I want to make you do something. So I want you to look at this slide again. And while I show you this slide, I'm going to talk through it. I'm going to talk about the subject, but I'm going to read some of the sentences that are on there. And I want to make sure that you kind of think about how it makes you feel. Are you excited? Are you inspired? Are you tired? So here we go. So if you have a lot of text on your slide, it's quite difficult to digest. And a lot of people will try to read what you're telling them. And when they read, they really don't listen to you. Another part is when there's a lot of text on the slide is that people think it's important. And when they write, they won't listen to you. And they might read or speak, or you might speak in a different pace that they might read. And they will also always feel like they are catching up, which can be very tiring. Whew. Okay. So I'm really curious how you felt. You can put it in the chat if you want. But I think this might not have been the best experience. I was reading random parts of the slide, while you might be reading other parts. Well, this actually happens quite a lot during presentations. There's a wall of text and there's someone in front of it presenting. Now, why is this a bad practice? So what is happening here that we actually do not recommend doing this? So the first thing is it really distracts your audience. Now it's maybe a bit easier because you have a little screen in front and you can maybe more focus on me. But imagine that the screen was behind me and I was in front. You would get really distracted by the wall of text that was there. And if you're distracted, you are not really following the story. You see this text, you're like, oh, maybe there's something important there, or maybe I should read. But if you read, you don't really listen. So it distracts your audience. The next problem is that it's probably unreadable in the back. If you have this much text on your slide, then you probably have a smaller font. And if the font is really small and you are presenting this at a conference and there are people in the back, they can probably not read it. And if they can't read it, and it doesn't matter that they can't read it, then why is it on the slide anyway? So you will hear this quite a lot actually in conferences where people say, oh yeah, this says this, but you can probably not read it in the back. So why is it on the slide if you cannot read it? The third problem with these types of slides, and maybe the most important problem here, is that your audience actually won't remember what you're telling them or what is on the slide. So what happens is that I am giving you a lot of new information. You see this slide and I'm talking at the same time. But to listen to and to read new information actually requires multitasking. And multitasking is usually more like switching tasks. And when you switch tasks the whole time, you're not really giving 100% to one task. And as a result, your audience will actually remember much less than when they would only be listening to you or when they would only be reading. So this distracts your audience. It's unreadable at the back, and your audience won't even remember this. But then how can you fix this? So maybe you have this much text and maybe you really want to show text. So I'm going to show you a little trick, and I'm going to give you actually the same information I gave you when we were seeing the slide full of text that you might have felt overwhelmed. So when people see something on the slide, see text on the slide, they will read what is on the slide. Your eyes will get distracted, they try to read. But when they read, they don't really listen to the speaker. And another point, that if there's a lot of text on a slide, that must mean that it's important, right? Because why would you otherwise put it on the slide? So information on your slide might be important. And what happens is that people are gonna write while reading, while trying to listen. But in the end, if they write, they don't really listen. And what happens is if you talk a lot and they try to write and read at the same time, they actually feel like they have to play catch up the whole time. They are not in sync with what you are telling. They're not in sync with your story. And they feel like they're running after the facts. So they feel like they need to play catch up. And this is also a reason why it can feel very overwhelming when you see or hear this. So what you see now is that I actually gave you around the same information on the left, where at first you saw one slide with all the information in long sentences. And on the right, I gave you, instead of one, I gave you 5 slides where I guided you through the process and took you by the hand by making things a little bit blurry, showing them at the moment that I wanted you to read them. And this really shows that less slides is not always better. It's really what is on the slides and what you do with it. Now, what is even better is if you can choose one key phrase to use on your slide. So for kind of the same information, I could use don't let your audience multitask. So we're using now one single phrase to describe everything that was on the previous slides. And the advantage here is that because it's only one sentence, or even less than a sentence, your audience will read it and then immediately go back to you for the story. So they don't get distracted that long. So this really helps. And another thing that is actually a big advantage of this is that if you forget to mention something, they won't realize that you forgot it. If you have a big slide with a lot of text and a lot of bullet points and you forget to mention one bullet point, people will notice. But now you have no idea what my intention is or the script that would be behind this slide. So now it's much easier if I make a mistake or forget something and you won't realize. So this is really nice. If you can create one single phrase that you can put in the center of your slide, and your audience will listen to you a bit more. Now, what is even better is if you can add a visual. So if you can create or make a visual that shows the point you want to make. So for example, here you can clearly see that there's a person that is distracted between seeing and listening. So instead of this key phrase, you can just use one single image. And this will help you if you think about the story that you want to tell behind this image. And it turns out that if you use an image next to what you are telling, and it really is a complementary image, people will remember with 65% more. So it boosts your memory by 65% if you have a visual aid, so an image next to something you are telling them. 65%. That's really a lot. Now, what is really important is that if you do this, it's important to have a picture that matches what you are telling them, that it's easy to understand why that picture is there. So let's take this example. You see a very cute little fish, Finding Nemo, but you might not have any idea why I wanted to show you this image. And when I talk, you might get distracted and think, why is this fish here? Why is this image here? And this will distract you from the story that the speaker is telling. So your audience will get distracted. Even if at the end of the slide, I might tell you that there's a fish here because your memory will be like the ones of a fish if you keep pictures there that don't match what you're saying. So your audience won't remember. So it's important to keep pictures there that really match what you are telling them. Otherwise, it will only distract them and actually reduce their memory. Now we went from one slide full of text to one slide with a picture. And a question that gets asked a lot is, but how can people understand my slides later? How can they look at my slides later without seeing the presentation and understand what I'm talking about? And for this, I really want to say that it's about the presentation. You are the presentation. You are telling the story. The slides are just a visual aid to help you tell the story. So it's actually important that the people that are reading your slides later don't really have to understand your slides. It's about the story that you told next to the slides. And I think if you have to cram all your information into slides, it's not a slide. They are not a presentation anymore. It's a document you're creating. So what I recommend, if you still want your audience to understand the slides later, even if they were not at the presentation, you can use speaker notes or a handout. So I actually uploaded, or we're going to upload my presentation to the PyLadies repository as well, where you will find speaker notes underneath every slide with the main points I wanted to make. So this way you can have a presentation that still attracts people and still engages people, keeping their focus, keeping their audience, their attention, without having these slides fully crammed of text, and they can still understand later on. So if you need them to understand it later, make sure to use speaker notes or a handout. Now, this presentation is also going to be about technical presentations, right? So you don't always want to have text on your slide. Sometimes you also want to have graphs. So let's take this graph. It's quite a big graph. And if I tell you to focus on February 2020, it might be a bit difficult. When you look at something else and then look back, you'll really have to find your way. And maybe if you see this graph without me telling you what it's about, you're going to think, oh, is there maybe a pattern I need to see? Maybe on the left, maybe on the right, I see something going up. So this when your audience is thinking about something else, it really distracts from your story. So what you can actually do is also in graphs and tables, you can play a lot with contrast. It's actually quite easy. I just changed the color of one of the charts, of one of the bar plots. And now if I show you this and I want you to focus on February 2020, you probably know where to look. It makes it much easier. Even if you look at the axis, you can immediately go back to the point I want you to focus on. So this really helps to guide the attention of your audience. You can also do this with line graphs. So let's say we have the same data, but now we plotted it in a line. And now I want you to focus on the first 3 months of 2020. So January until March. Now it might be a bit more difficult to find because we were already looking at February 2020, you know where to look. But now if you look at the axis and then look back, it might be a bit difficult and you quickly lose what you need to see. Now what you can do is add some transparent blocks to make sure that the only thing they can focus on is the part you want them to focus on. So January, February, March 2020, you now see clearly in the view. And even if you go to the side, to the left axis, to the x-axis or the y-axis, you can still see what I want you to see. You can still keep your focus more easily. Now this also works for tables. So let's say you did a lot of work and you have all your results. This is actually a very old table from a thesis of mine. And now you see all these results in a table, but it's quite overwhelming. You might not know what to focus on. And if I tell you to focus on line 4 and line 7, you might need to look, you might take a while, and I might have lost you already. Now, what you can do is again, work with contrast and add some transparent blocks on top of your table. So now if I want you to focus on line 4 and line 7, it is very easy for you to know what I'm talking about. You can also really see that I want you to focus on the score, not something else in the table. So now we focus on these 2 rows, but as you might already see, it's still quite small. And maybe someone in the back of the room cannot read this. So what we will do is just zoom in. I created this all in Google Slides. You don't have to be a Paint or Photoshop wizard to create these things. These are actually 3 images, 3 the same images, cropped, made transparent, zoomed out or in, and put on top of each other. I will also be sharing this PowerPoint so you can actually look at the exact things I did and play around with it a little bit. So now you see that playing with focus or playing with contrast and transparency in your slides can really help you focus your audience on what they want to see. Now, this wouldn't be a PyLadies meetup if I didn't show you some Python code, because you can also do this for Python. Let's say I want to show you some code about machine learning models. I am a data scientist after all. So I want to show you this little pipeline. And as you can see, there's quite a lot that is on one slide. It's not really clear what are comments, what is code, where should you focus. So the first step you can do is play around with color. This is actually directly copied from my editor. And you can already see the different color patterns make sense. So you see the comments, you see a print statement, you see some input. So this already helps your audience by just getting some perspective on what the code is. But again, this is quite small and people in the back won't see. So even though I want to walk people through this code, it's actually better to split it up. So let's say I want to focus on creating the data set first. I might discuss these 2 functions, tell a little bit about the number of samples we're going to look at, and then we can go to the next step. So the next step is training the model. For this, we will use a logistic regression model and train it on the train data on the train data. Then when we have this model, we're going to predict on the test set. We get some predictions out of this. And with these predictions, we're going to evaluate the model on precision and recall. Now, I want to know what this precision and recall is, so I'm going to print it out as well. So now I hope that you could kind of follow along with the story as I was telling it. You didn't get distracted by other things in the slide, and you could clearly see which functions were for which step in this pipeline. So I hope that this really shows you that you can use more slides. You can use bigger fonts, more contrast and transparency to really guide the attention of your audience. Now it's time for our online tip. What happens a lot is that when we are presenting online, people think, well, you are close to your laptop, so you will see my slides. But what actually happens is that a lot of people are actually watching on their phones. Maybe some of you in the audience are also watching on their phone. And then the same rules apply. You still need a big enough font for them to see it. You still need to guide their focus through the slides. So when you're creating your slides, especially for an online audience, take into account that they are watching on different devices. So the output can look differently. So the more minimal you can create your slides, the bigger the font, the less text, the easier it will be for them to focus as well. Now, taking into account different devices doesn't only mean the screen. It also means the internet connection. What is quite difficult now is that not everyone has the perfect 100 gigabits, I don't know what, internet. So what happens quite a lot is that people have bad connections. I don't know if you ever saw a movie or a video from someone when you have a bad connection. It's not really a nice experience. So when you're creating your slides, especially for an online audience, take into account that their connection might not be that good. If this is the case, I would actually recommend to not use videos or GIFs in the presentation, unless it's really, really necessary, but try to avoid it. If you know your audience and you know that they have a good connection, you can definitely try, but try to avoid. So take into account different devices when you create your slides. Now let's summarize a bit. So we created our slides. We know that it doesn't really matter how many slides you have. It really matters how much is on it. Key phrases are actually better, or if you can add an image that can really strengthen the story you are telling. It can boost memory by 65%. Now, even though it can boost memory, make sure that the image really fits your talk. And then for your online audience, make sure that it works on different devices and that you don't have anything in your presentation that can cause a lot of lag. So now we have our story. We have banging slides. Next up is presenting. So now we have all this. We need to communicate our story. And you want to communicate this with confidence. It's important that your audience thinks you're confident, or you can appear confident to your audience, because then they will also remember a little bit more. So I really want to stress here that it's more important that you seem confident than that you feel fully confident. Now I have a question for you about presenting. And I'm curious whether you think this statement is true or false. So let's go back to Slido. Is this true or false? It is more difficult for introverts to create a good presentation. So do you think it is more difficult for introverts to create a good presentation? True or false? Or in other words, it's much easier for extroverts to create a good presentation. So I see some answers coming in. I think we're at 12 now, 13. I'm really curious what you think, whether this statement is true or not. So a lot of people think false, which is good. So it is completely false that it's more difficult for introverts to create a good presentation. It is actually, even though introverts and extroverts might struggle with different things, for both, it is not a given that they can present really well immediately. I myself am an introvert, and I always thought that my extroverted friends would be so much better in presenting a story or talking to an audience because they are more comfortable with talking with a lot of people. But it's actually not really true. It really doesn't matter whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. Now, for me, giving presentations always feels a little bit like this. So for me, public speaking can really feel like I'm going to go for skydiving. So I want to take you on this journey with me. I want you to imagine this feeling with me. So look at the screen and think about this. The last week, you got really nervous. You were excited, but you were also not really sure if you made the right decision. And today is the day you're going to do it. You're really going to do it. And as the day progressed, you're like, can I still back out? No, I promised. I really have to go. And then you're there. And then you feel your hands get a bit clammy, a little bit warm. Now place your hands on your stomach. You feel your stomach turning, making jumps, going round and round. Now place your hand on your chest. You feel your heartbeat in your chest racing. You're so nervous. And now you're going to take a step to the edge and jump into the deep. So did you think I was talking about skydiving or public speaking? Because for me, this actually felt the same way when I started this presentation. I still get nervous when I do presentations. I still get nervous when I have to speak in front of a big audience. And I think this feeling never goes away. It does get less when I practice. It does get less the more I do it, but it's still always there. And it's not a bad thing. It actually means that you really care and you want to give your audience a nice experience. So I always try to frame it as not being nervous, but being really excited. Now, I am not alone in this feeling. So let's go back to Slido. Actually, a lot of celebrities also have a fear of public speaking or had a fear of public speaking. So the question to you, who had a fear of public speaking? Was it Julia Roberts? Was it Gandhi? Was it Princess Diana, Warren Buffett, or Katherine Heigl? So we have two very famous actresses. We have a princess. We have a investment tycoon who had a fear of public speaking. So they are all very big and they speak to audiences quite often or have spoken to audiences quite a lot. Now let's see what you answered. It actually turns out that they all had a fear of speaking. They all had a big fear of speaking in front of a public. And these are people that are now seen as excellent speakers that could move audiences. So if you feel that you are a little bit afraid of public speaking, you feel nervous, then think of this. There's actually a lot of big people or big celebrities that actually also had these feelings. So you're really not alone. So this brings me to the next quote that I think is really important when you think about presenting with confidence. There is no such thing as presentation talent. It is called presentation skills. So really try to emphasize that these are presentation skills. And because it's a skill, it is something that needs to grow and improve by practice. Because it's a skill, it also means that everyone can learn it. as long as you practice enough. So to quote a very old wise man, Yoda, perfect practice makes. So in the words of Yoda, practice makes perfect. This holds for the presentation itself. So when you are going to present something, it really, really helps to practice it. Also to make it sound more confident, but also to feel more confident about the point you want to make. But it also holds for public speaking in general. The more often you speak in public, the more often you take that step towards the ledge, jump into the deep and do a presentation, the more confident you will start to feel. So practice is really, really important. And it turns out that a lot of people that are seen as excellent speakers, for example, Michelle Obama or Steve Jobs, they practice a lot. They practice a lot before they make a speech. Steve Jobs actually presented really good presentations, and he practiced 8 weeks before already. So he practiced for 8 weeks, and he actually did 2 days of full dress rehearsals. So even if you see only a short part of this clip, think about all the practice that went in front. Now, sometimes it can be a bit scary to practice, especially I always recommend to practice for an audience, because then they can give you pointers on what flows and what is understandable. But sometimes it can be a bit scary to practice for someone. So in that case, first step is to just practice for yourself. Make sure that you do the mouth movements. So don't do it in your head. Really try to speak out loud. You will notice which words flow together nicely, what doesn't, and where you will get stuck. So practice in front of the mirror, practice in the shower. I always practice even before my laptop in a Zoom meeting all by myself. And you can record it and watch back how it's going. So practice, practice, practice. Now, sometimes you don't have the time to practice everything. What I really recommend is to practice the beginning, practice your end. These are the moments where you really want to grab the attention of your audience. This is something you really, really want to practice. If you have some time left, practice the transitions, so you know how to get from one point to the other, instead of just waiting until the slide arrives and talking. So first thing, practice the beginning, practice the ending, practice the transitions. Now, should you create a script for this, or should you just use an outline? And this really, really depends. It depends on you, what works for you. When I started presenting, I always got the recommendation to create an outline and not a script, because a script would sound too rehearsed, too fake, and it was better to do an outline. But I actually always use a script. I really like to use a script because I'm not a natural storyteller. I struggle with making my point clear and concise, and I get lost in my head quite a lot. So for me, it really, really helps to write down parts of this presentation and to make sure that the points that I want to make very powerful, that they have the correct words, the correct wordings. So also for this presentation, I actually scripted out quite a lot. The important part is that if you use a script, you should practice a lot, because you really don't want it to sound rehearsed or read from a screen. And you also shouldn't be afraid to deviate from this script. The script is more to help you to create nice sentences, but it's not there during the presentation. You shouldn't be afraid to deviate, and that way you won't really block yourself when you can't remember that one nice sentence. So outline or script, this really depends on you. In the end, it's about what makes you confident during your presentation. Now, we practiced a lot. We either created our script or outline. We feel very confident, and then something goes wrong. And then suddenly you are stuck. So How can you prepare for this? I always create an emergency plan. So hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. So a few simple tips that you can do here is think about what happens if your laptop can't connect. Let's say you present somewhere at a venue and you cannot connect your laptop because the correct connectors are not available. Make sure that the host also has a copy of your presentation. Could also be that there is no internet access at the venue and you might have created your presentation in Google Slides. Make sure that you download the presentation and bring it with you on a USB stick. Another issue that can happen is when there is a really slow internet. So make sure you go to the spot in your house where you have the best connection and think about an emergency plan. What happens if your internet cuts out? For example, you can ask the presenter or you can ask the host to present your slides while you call in with your phone. And this will help you to be confident in case there is something going on. If there is an issue, you still feel confident enough to fix it. So hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. Now there's one more thing to do, and that is to stand in front of your audience and connect with them. And this is always a bit scary. The moment you step on that stage and you see this big room of all these people looking at you, and you have to start your presentation. Now, it's really important that you connect with your audience. If you don't look at them and you look at the ground the whole time, or you look at your screen, they feel really disconnected and they will be distracted. So they won't listen to you after a while. So what I always do is I actually look somewhere to the left in the front of the audience. Usually a host is there that you might already have spoken to, feel a bit comfortable with. Then I look somewhere to the right. I look somewhere to the back of the room. And I look somewhere to the right of the room. Now, when I do this, I don't do this the whole time. So you don't do a word to the left and a word to the right. Try to make a point, or maybe one slide, you explain more towards the left. Then in your next point, you go to the right. This way, you actually go all over the audience and they feel like they are seen. It can be a bit scary to really look at someone in the audience. What I always do is I actually look at their forehead and then they feel seen, or they think you look at the other person behind them, but there's still that connection. And if you're at a conference or you're at the meetup and you are presenting and there are 4 nice friends that joined you, have them sit in these corners of the room. This way, you feel comfortable looking at them and looking at the audience. Now, when we are doing this online, the game totally changes. So when you are online and you want to connect with your audience, you actually shouldn't look at your audience, which is quite weird, right? You need to look at your webcam. So what happens is if I look at the screens, the little videos of my audience, I will not look at my laptop, or I will not look at my camera. I will look at the screens. So when I really look at the people that are behind it, they don't feel seen because they cannot see that I see them. This sounds a bit weird, but I want you to think about this in the next meeting or presentation you are. See if you feel how connected you are with someone, depending on where they look. So if I would look to a screen down, a little bit down, and I would tell this whole presentation like this, even though I might look at you, you would feel not connected to me. You had the idea I was not really paying attention to you. Now let's say I am looking at you, but I have a second screen next to me and you are on the second screen. If I present like this the whole time, it is a bit weird, right? So I have the feeling I see you, but you have no idea that I am listening to you, or you don't feel connected to me. Now look at the difference. I'm now talking to my camera. I cannot see anyone. Even if you have your camera on, I have it somewhere on a second screen, so I can see it from the corner of my eye, but I have no idea if Bhumika is, for example, looking at me at the moment. I might be looking at her and she feels like I'm looking at her, but I can't see a thing. So I'm looking at my camera. Now remember, you are creating this presentation for your audience. So it's important that your audience feels seen and heard and that they can pay attention. So it's more important that you look at the camera and they feel seen than that you look at the audience. Now this, you might forget this after a while. So this is a very cool trick. You can use either sticky notes or googly eyes around your camera. So I actually have 2 sticky notes. I can take one off that are there at the camera so that I can focus on you. Now this really helps not only in presentations, but actually also in meetings. So next meeting, I want you to check whether you can see if someone is staring at you through the screen or maybe to the side and how you feel about this connection. So this was my tip for the online audience. Now, we saw that it's super important to practice, that practicing presentations makes perfect. Even the most brilliant speakers practice and prepare extensively. So before we go to questions, let's wrap up what we discussed today. The success of your presentation is not about all the things you broadcast or all the information you share, but really about what the audience receives. It is important to create the story for your audience so that they find it very interesting and that it's important for them. You can guide their attention in the slides, making sure that they can focus on what you are saying and don't get distracted by anything else. And to get more confidence, you have to practice. So practice will grow your confidence. Taking these things into account will help you in making successful presentations because they make it easy for the audience to focus on your story. And then at the end of your presentation, hopefully they go home feeling a little bit smarter and a little bit more interested than when they started. Thank you so much. Are there any questions?
Terrific presentation, Sharon. By the way, regarding questions, what we can do, first option, we can ask people just type it, but probably if you can raise your hand, it will be faster. We can just unmute yourself. You can just ask your question directly, whatever you prefer, right?
What I prefer or the audience prefers?
The audience, sorry.
No, I'm fine with both. So
yeah, so if you're okay with asking the question yourself, then raise your hand. And if you'd like us to ask it for you, us being the hosts, just put it in the chat and we'll ask it. So we already have one question from Suze. Which slide software did you use and which font are you using? She says it's great.
Good questions. I'm using Slido. So there are different ways to get these question things into your presentation. So the whole presentation I made in Google Slides, and I have an integration with Slido where I can ask these questions to the audience. But there are actually many more different tools. A well-known one is also Mentimeter. And we added actually some links on the PyLadies repo about this as well. The fonts, I am not sure. I think it's Montserrat. But I'm sharing the PowerPoint, so you can definitely see and you can take some inspiration from this. But great to hear.
We have another tip from Giannis. Avoiding cold drinks before presentations also helped him.
Very good too.
And
yeah, I think
personally,
go
ahead.
No, I think it's especially for these. What calms your nerves and how to get less nervous before the presentation is really personal. I know a lot of people that actually do the power pose to feel more powerful just before. I am a person that doesn't really talk before to anyone else because I get a lot really in my head. but it really helps me to have a bottle of water and to think about that I'm excited. And then these tips like don't drink any cold beverages, don't drink too much before a presentation can also really help. So what is your tip, Bhumika?
Yeah, my tip was just more about sharing your presentation with people. So what I do is I find someone who knows nothing about the topic and I send them my presentation and I tell them, can you at least figure out what the main topic is from it? And
That's
if
really
they
good.
can do that, then it's good enough.
Yeah.
Technical presentations, I usually send it to my mom, and she's not a technical person. So if she can figure it out, I'm good.
Yeah, especially for these presentations, if it's about a topic that you know really well, you are so in your head usually. And it really helps if there's someone else that can just check, hey, I don't understand this, or hey, can you explain this, or this is super easy. So feedback from someone else can be super, super powerful.
So we have some more questions coming in. Christine is asking, when do you know that you are prepared enough for your presentation?
I think it depends maybe also on the person you are. So I am quite perfectionistic and I never feel prepared enough. So even before this presentation, just like half an hour before, I was stressing and thinking, oh, did I prepare enough? Did I do my slides correctly? Should I change this? Is this okay? So I think this really depends per person, but it already helps if you can practice it at least for yourself, or maybe for one other person that you really trust and feel comfortable with. And if it flows quite nicely, then it's already good. But also remember that it doesn't have to be perfect. It's a skill that you are creating and you are practicing every time. You don't have to be the perfect person with the perfect presentation, with the perfect sentences the whole time. So keep on practicing, just jump into the deep and do it. And know that if you're a little bit like me, you will always have the feeling that it's not enough or it's not correct enough. So you can go on weeks and months and it still wouldn't be right. So just do it. That's my advice. Just do it.
So we have another very interesting question from Suze. Can you recommend any good articles or tips about storytelling?
Yes, we actually also added these to the repository. So I created 2 files for you there. One is with the handout with the questions you can ask yourself about how to create the story. And I actually added an example of how I used that for this presentation. So you might see some things coming back in those answers that are in this presentation as well. The other document we created, there are some very nice books, blogs, videos that really help me for little tips and tricks about presentations. And there's also a little section with some additional tips. So I think for maybe one of the tips that helped me a lot is you might see that I'm standing now for a presentation. Especially online presentations, it is important to give energy to your audience. And for me, it really helps to stand up. I am more in a presenter mode. My voice is better when I stand. So standing up really helps. Another thing that really, really helped is think about, and this is mainly for online audiences, think about where you stand. Let's say I'm going to do a presentation. This is going to be awkward, but let's say I'm going to do a presentation and I will be here the whole time. You might feel a bit weird about it, right? So that would feel like I would be in your face and the audience would feel a bit weird about it. So for me, it helps to stand on a distance. I think this is one of the tricks that really helped me lately, but also to practice more. It's really about practice. But you will find a lot of other tips and tricks there as well.
So that also is a nice segue into our next question from Selena. In Zoom presentation, the presenter is often relegated to a tiny box at the top of the slide of the screen. So how do you make people feel engaged or connected to you if you're so small on their screen?
Yeah, I think this is a difficult one. So I do know that there it depends on the Zoom license. I think there is an option to pin someone or to spotlight someone for the whole group. So this is an option. I think for the rest, it is difficult because someone might also be looking at their phone and then I might be even smaller. So what I try to do is make my slides enticing and interesting and try to also work on my voice. Because it could be that they won't see you. And then to make it more engaging, you can use these things like Slido or just ask them, imagine you are doing a presentation for PyLadies. This will already trigger something in their brain and will already give a feeling of, okay, I am engaged. I am doing something in this story as well.
Okay, so we have 2 more questions at the moment, and one
raised
is from
hand.
Samira. One's from Samira. What would you say is recommended length of a presentation? People can focus only for so long.
Yeah, this is a difficult one. They can focus for so long, so it's important to re-engage and also important to take breaks. So what you will see if you have, let's say you go to a conference and the whole day there are presentations. Usually after lunch, people are tired, they don't want to anymore. And they are usually also quite long. So I think it depends a little bit on also what is around it, how many presentations are around yours. I prefer to do presentations of 20, 30 minutes because you can be a little bit more to the point. But if you have a longer presentation like the one we're doing today, you can actually create separate parts. So I actually created 3 topics. So I gave you at least 3 breaks because I switched between topics that make it feel a little bit more interesting. But especially online, I think 20 to 30 minutes is actually quite a nice time, especially because you want to have some additional time for questions. Anything longer, really think about these breaks that you need to include, or breaks or mental breaks of engagement things.
So the next 2 questions are related, so I'm just quickly going to club them together.
Yeah, but sorry, Bhumika, but before that we have a raised hand. Let's just jump for a second for raised hand and then go back to the list of questions. Okay?
All right, sure. Yeah, Chanel, I think you should be able to unmute yourself. I'm asking you to unmute so you can just ask your question.
Can you guys just let me know if you can hear me?
Yes.
All right, great. Hi, Sharon. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was great.
Thank you.
I just have a question. When you showed the slides regarding the code blocks and stuff, I thought that was really nice in the way you presented it. I often have to do that for, I want to say, presentations which is more internal. So it will often be with the CTO or the CEO. And it's less of a sale, so it's more of a technical discussion, but you have to present what you have been doing for the last 2 weeks to a month. Yeah. And I think there's a lot more discussions which happens in those kind of presentations, and you can't just cut them off because those are important questions. But often you do know that your presentation will take a certain amount of time, and they ask so much questions, and the discussions get so large that you never get to the conclusion. Yeah. So I guess my question is, do you have any advice on how to kind of take your presentation back without being rude about it?
Yeah. Oh, that's a really good question. That's a really good question. So what will probably help is if you know that this happens quite a lot, you can already think of some sentences that you can say really confidently without sounding very rude, that you kind of already know up front, so you're not that taken aback when you have to say them. So something I would say is like, hey, this is really great, a really great discussion. Let's continue this after the presentation. I'm going to take a note of it, and we're going to jump back in, and we're going to finish at the end, for example. But I think it helps if you indeed think about these things up front. Something that I also notice is that usually when you think you are, and I noticed that this is for a lot of women, especially women in tech or programming, if you think you are too rude, you are probably not even that rude. So if you think that you are, I noticed this myself. If I think I'm really rude, some people think I'm just to the point and not being rude at all. So as long as you acknowledge that the discussion is indeed great and that you do want to continue it, but then preferably at the end, I think it will not sound that rude at the moment. So think about a few answers you can give, practice them a little bit up front, so you won't be taken aback when it happens. That would be my tip for this one, but it's a really good question.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Okay, so that brings us back to our question. So we have two questions related to the technology you're using. Are you using a laptop camera or a separate webcam? What kind of tech would you recommend, using a mic, earphones, whatever, to improve the audio and the video together?
Yeah, so I can quickly walk you through my setup. So I have a microphone here. This is not really necessary, but because I am a little bit further away from my laptop, and if you notice, I sometimes move a little bit, this will give better audio. This is actually quite cheap one. I think it was 15, 20 euros or something. And it's good enough for this. There's also a cord that is 6 meters long, so you can walk through your whole house if you want. I am using the camera of my laptop, but I have a standing desk. You could also use like an ironing board, for example, or so I have some books underneath it to make sure that the laptop is at eye level. So this will feel a little bit better when you see it, and it's also a little bit better for your face. So if you saw when I came up close, right? If I would go here, you would see my under chin, and you would see all kinds of things that look maybe less appealing to the audience. So having it at eye level really helps. I actually have two monitors behind it, but my presentation is showing on the screen of my laptop. So if I need to double check at my presentation, now I'm looking at my slides, and now I'm looking at my camera. So there's a slight difference, but in the beginning, now I am looking at the audience. So I have a separate screen there. I have lights next to my camera just to make sure that the lighting is okay. It's just a normal, let's see if I can show you. It's an IKEA light, very cheap bulb, but it really helps. And so I really like to use a clicker, especially if I'm further away, that can move the slides. But this is my setup. So I started when I started presenting online, I started behind my desk with bad lighting, and I try to improve every time I am presenting. But you can do this with the easiest thing. So just make sure that you have a good connection. You make the connection to the camera. You have some lighting that is shining in front. You don't even need a microphone. Just make sure that you are talking loud enough that they can hear. I think I also added a link of how to get the best out of your Zoom setup. So there are a lot of nice videos online that can tweak your own. So what you might also see is, to make it more homey, I added a plant here. And this, even though it's a small thing, it might feel more connected, or it feels more cozy when you see the presentation. So it's just a little tips and tweaks that I use to make it a bit better. Yeah, oh, sorry, this is my setup.
Suze is also asking, how many times did you rehearse the entire presentation?
I think the entire presentation I rehearsed twice. I did rehearse the start quite a lot and some of the parts. So especially, like I told you, I'm not a really natural storyteller. So I wrote down some sentences and tried to practice them. I also used to have an a lot, and this is something I am practicing. I'm not perfect in this, and every time I present, I try to do better. But I did practice quite a bit. I practiced this week a few times in the evening, just small parts, just underneath the shower, saying, hey, make it easy for the audience to focus on your story. Yeah, so I did practice a bit, but practicing a presentation of an hour also takes an hour, right? So you have to have the time for that.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, I usually, at least on the day of the presentation, I make it a point to take a walk where I switch off the data and the Wi-Fi of my phone so that I'm only focused on that, because I'm very easily distracted. So
Yeah.
I do that, and then every time I'm just having a sip of water, I think about it in my head. Okay, point 1, point 2, point 3. I still have it in my head.
Yeah, that's a really good one. You don't want to be distracted when you're practicing everything. I practice parts while being in a Zoom meeting by myself, so I could actually record it and then watch back. It's not the most pleasant experience for yourself. It always feels a bit cringy if you hear yourself talk, or at least I think so, but it really helps as well. This is also a really good practice, maybe even better than just talking about it online, out loud.
Cool. I also have like a personal question. For example, when you prepare presentation, so it's nice to have good slides, as we already mentioned, but sometimes you need to, if it's about presenting some business points, or if it's about presenting some pieces of code or something, you want to make sure that there is like a giveaway slide deck ready. So what's your recommendation on it? Should it be 2 separate pieces? And what should be in the second, let's say, giveaway slide deck?
That's a good one. I think you can do different things. So I know that at my work, a lot of people actually present with their handout slide deck. And this is really nice if you look at it after, but when you're seeing it, you see this wall of text. So you can do different things. One thing, if you still want to have all the text on the slides, you can still walk through the slides or walk through the text with these transparency blocks. These are just blocks that are on top of the text. It's actually quite easy, and just lines that you remove. And then in the end, you actually have the whole text still there. So you could do this during the presentation, and then for the handout deck, you could remove like the transition slides that you created before. So where you would have maybe I can show the 5 slide, or for example, this slide.
Mm-hmm.
I could decide to remove that transparency block that is just above the other text and only share this slide and not these 2 before. So you already reduce it a bit. So this is one part. It probably depends a bit on what your company likes. You could create a second slide deck. It does take more effort and more time. But if you write it down on speaker notes, it can also be quite nice. I think it depends on the company and the people that are gonna look at it, but you can make it as easy or hard for yourself as you can. So you can also decide you do want to present the handout slide deck with all the text, but then just go through it slowly and guide them with these blocks. I think this already really helps with the audience.
Thanks.
So we have one last question. I think we have time for maybe one more question after that. So if you have any question, think it up. So Selena has a question of any opinion on virtual virtual backgrounds on Zoom.
Virtual backgrounds. It's a difficult one, but I actually saw a really cool video about this. I think it's also in the tips and tricks. So a virtual background is quite nice because you don't have to clean up the mess behind you, or maybe someone will walk behind you and you can make sure that it's not visible. So this is nice about the virtual backgrounds. What I always have, if I see someone with a virtual background, I'm like, what is this person hiding? What is behind that? And I get a bit distracted and just thinking, okay, what would be behind it? Is this a messy person? Is it clean? I don't know. So this is, and a virtual background isn't a bad thing. And also blurring out the background like Bhumika is doing is also, I think, quite nice. I think it depends a little bit also on what is behind it. So if you know that it's difficult to clean up and there might be someone walking behind it, it's actually quite nice to do it. You can also use virtual backgrounds as icebreakers. So you could start with a very funny background, but make sure it's not there the whole time because it can be a bit distracting. So I actually like to try to personalize my background a bit, but it depends also on how much room you have.
Yeah, and so I think this is our last question. If you have any questions, you can still remain on the call, but it was scheduled until 8 p.m., so it's okay. And
you
we
can
have
always send me messages via LinkedIn or if you have any questions afterwards as well.
Yeah, and I can vouch for Sharon that she's very active on LinkedIn. She has a very low reply time on LinkedIn. So yeah, so we have two questions right now. Suggestions for how to present code in technical presentation, any good tools to embed it in presentation slides, or is it better to switch into IDE?
I think it depends on how much you want to show. I think it's important that you practice what you show, because if you go from your IDE to maybe another terminal to maybe another thing, people will get distracted. So make sure you can zoom in, that there is a clean background as well of your IDE, and that you know where you're going. So I think it's not necessarily a bad thing when you're presenting in an IDE, but go slow. Don't scroll down immediately. Don't move your mouse the whole time from up to down. Go slow, practice it at one time, and don't show too much at the same time. I think that's, and of course the zooming in is quite important. So I think especially if you, for example, want to run code and show that, then that's really nice if you can do it in the terminal or in your IDE. If they're just parts of the code, then it's actually easier maybe to just create screenshots and walk through them, just like I did in the presentation.
Thank you so much. And yeah, I think I personally like to copy code from an IDE with a bit of color coding into my slides if I'm doing it. So I think that's also something you can do a lot.
Yeah, definitely make sure you do the color coding. It makes the world of difference if you see well, we have a lot of slides here. If you see the difference between this and this already feels much more comfortable. So definitely do the color coding here.
And so we have another question from Jennifer. I'm not sure if I pronounced your name right, but anyway, any dress code or advice for presentations?
I think this really depends on you. In the end, you have to do the presentation, so you have to feel comfortable and confident. I'm standing here in my leggings. I'm not showing it, but you cannot see it. And I have, because I like to wear a blazer, I feel more confident when I'm dressed like this. But I think that's the key. If you are not confident or feel comfortable if you are wearing a blazer, or if you don't feel comfortable if you only wear a t-shirt, then don't do it. It's much more important that you are comfortable and that you can present really comfortably and that you feel confident than that you are wearing a pencil skirt or something very fancy. It's really about making you comfortable. And the nice thing now with online presentations is you can wear anything below the waist. You can have your leggings, your joggings on, you can have flip-flops, doesn't matter. As long as you make sure you don't walk away from this spot, otherwise people will see.
Thank you. And so I had this one experience when I was at this Indian cultural event, and I was too lazy. I was running between meetings. I didn't have the time to change. So I just pulled on this fancy shawl, and underneath it, I was wearing shorts and yeah, basically very bare minimal stuff. And I got so many compliments on the shawl and my outfit because that's all they could see. So
very smart.
Game your audience.
Yeah, you can always tweak your style a bit. I think it is important that you feel comfortable and you check a little bit about what the audience is you're presenting for. So you feel a little bit more in sync, but definitely don't overdo it if you're not comfortable with anything.
You know, the most funny thing is, like, I'm sitting right now in a kangaroo onesie, and I just like, it's just comfortable for me. And like all my company and all the clients that I'm working with, they starting to ask me like, oh, by the way, where's your onesie if I'm not in a onesie? So they're so get accustomed to, let's say, MS Teams calls or Zoom calls
So nice.
when they see a part of onesie.
That's really good. Yeah, it's important, right, that you are comfortable. I rather talk with someone that is comfortable sitting there in a nice warm onesie. I wish I was wearing a onesie. Than that someone is like finicking on their shirt or anything. So yeah, being comfortable and feeling confident in what you're wearing. That's the key.
Yeah, beautiful. And by the way, I saw there are like some nice links shared how you can embed the pieces of code, how to create a beautiful images of pieces of code.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, nice.
Oh,
That's great.
Yeah, and I will also I'll export the chat and pull out all these links and add them to the GitHub. So yeah, I'll make your life easier basically.
Yeah, great. So everyone definitely check out the repository and the tips and tricks page we created. It's not all the tips and tricks, but it's definitely ones that really helped me to create nice presentations.
Great.
So any more questions? I think now's your time. Otherwise, we're closing.
Yeah, I think the most like thank you coming in. So
yeah.
Once again, it was really terrific presentation.
Yeah, thanks everyone for letting me practice my presentations again as well, and for everyone that was here and had these great questions. It was really nice. And feel free to reach out whenever you have questions or you want to have a tip on the presentation.
And I have to say, for someone with an extremely short attention span, this is one of the longest I've sat through in a while. So
nice.
Thank you.
That's a really big compliment. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so I think we can close, right?
Yeah. So thank you all for joining. Have a lovely week. Have a lovely evening. And next month we have a presentation, a workshop rather, about ethics in data analysis and how to do the right kind of data analysis. So see you next month at that. And otherwise, have a great evening. Have a great day. Thank you all for joining. And thank you so much, Sharon, for hosting.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
See you.